Hello and welcome to the Functional Health Podcast with Ben Atkinson. I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Chris George, who is a GP and Director of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and Barry Smith, who is the founder of Symprove. We dive into the world of probiotics, the story of Symprove, the efficacy of probiotics, and the emerging trials investigating whether probiotics can improve chronic disease and even neurodegenerative conditions. We also explore health optimization, or in Barry's words, how to make well people weller. And yes, I did say weller. Let's get into it. Chris, Barry, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Nice to speak to you.
Thanks for having us, Ben.
It's a pleasure to have you both on. And Barry, for the very first time, how are you doing today, sir?
Very well, thanks very much. Had a little tech problems, as we normally do with these things, but apart from that, I'm reasonably relaxed. Quite hot, though, isn't it?
Yes, it's very hot. I'm not dealing with the heat very well. Chris, how about you? How's your dog as well? How's she dealing with the heat?
Yeah, so Brown was actually the one out in the sunshine. She's a black Labrador, and she's enjoying the sunshine more than I am. But we're both relaxing, enjoying the warm weather. It's been quite a nice change. Normally here in the UK we have pretty bad weather over summer, don't we?
Yes, and I have been doing the terrible thing of complaining about the heat. But anything below about 10 degrees I complain, and anything above 25 I melt. So I struggle to stay happy, I think, in the British weather in general. Well, it's great to have you both on to talk about probiotics. And Barry, you actually founded the company Symprove, and your story is quite profound. I'm friends with the Mac twins, founders of the Gut Stuff. I know they interviewed you and came to the farm quite a while ago now. And from setting out with the aim to improve shelf life of animal feed to then seemingly improving the health of humans, it sounds like one heck of a journey.
Yes, certainly is. My CEO, Mike, tells us, always explains that it's serendipity and curiosity. I always layer onto that hard work and quite a lot of good luck and meeting the right people. So it's been an exciting journey. We've developed an idea to have clean feed for animal livestock initially. The time I started, it was commonplace for there to be low quality content within pellets that you fed your livestock, and that could include sawdust, chicken feces, rendered waste from abattoirs. And of course, as we all now know, that managed to jump disease for the first time, species to species. Scrapies becoming BSE, and then there was the panic it was going to become CJD in ourselves. So I was initially looking for a clean food. We then used bacteria to preserve that clean food, which was a combination of germinated cereals and pulses, and that gave us a really high quality and accessible food. But once we laid the bacteria on, we began to get what we now are confident is a major health benefit in people. But of course, that was a 35-year journey. So I say it's 35 years to be an overnight success.
Yes. From the outside, it maybe looks like an overnight success, but I'm sure it was a lot of stress and a lot of work behind the scenes. When you said CJD, that is something Jakob disease, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
People know as mad cow disease.
Yes, that's right. So there's a famous picture which I keep showing up, which is of the cow unable to keep its legs. But the fascinating thing was because the rendered waste from the abattoir of the spine of sheep was put into pellets for them to eat, they managed to transfer a disease from one species to the next. And that's why there were so many thousands of cattle slaughtered, and to try and get the lid on that. And of course, then the rules changed and the quality of food started to go up. But by then I'd already developed a very, very high quality clean food from germinated cereals. And that worked incredibly well. But we were using the bacteria to preserve that germinated grain. And we began to be able to measure the impact on animals' health and the ability to have a reduced dependency on antibiotics, because The pellets at that time, of course, were laced with antibiotics, and we were walking away from that defense mechanism as well. And it's not a defense mechanism anyway, it's a destructive mechanism, and we're looking for a system that stimulates the animal's microbiome to function at a higher level and therefore defend itself.
Perfect. I mean, antibiotics arguably do the opposite. Yes, they might stop certain bacterial infections and things of that nature, but in relation to the microbiome, they destroy the microbiome, and what you're doing is building it up in order to make the body more resilient. So when you were feeding these pigs the feed with these probiotics on it, what kind of benefits did you see, and how did you measure that?
Well, the first thing that we were interested in measuring was young stock mortality. And so, for example, in genetically refined animals like pigs in the UK, the mortality rate is normally manageable, but it's a bit wrong if it goes towards 12 or 14%. But if you introduce Symprove in those circumstances, you could halve the mortality. If you took it to an animal that was not genetically refined to be grown intensively, like, for example, ostriches, and I found this out after, in fact, the farmers had utilized our technology. Essentially, everything that was hatched from the hatcheries had a mortality rate of 70 to 80%, and we took it down to 2%.
Wow.
And although all of that information was gathered, lightheartedly on fag packets, me collecting data and numbers and counting and measuring, because there's a scientist in every one of us if we can just observe and collate. And it was amazingly that one piece of information that tripped Professor Ingvar Bjarnason to be interested in pursuing the idea for people, because he said either I was the biggest liar under the sun or he had to investigate this.
Amazing. I mean, that's absolutely stunning. And it shows that your initiative just to measure it and monitor these animals made a case for someone to study it in humans. I'm guessing, was there a jump to straight studying it in humans, or was it tested in animals again first?
No, we had enough data for the medical team at King's to be content to go straight to phase 2, because I'd been using it for near on 20 years by then in every type of species. We did have some information that was from agricultural colleges and universities where they tested certain aspects of our ideas on livestock. So it wasn't all from myself collecting the data. And by then we already had some people who were using it. So smart farmers who realized what the technology was about would use it to sort out various gut problems within their families. And it was that was encouraging me to move. And I suppose the biggest impact was when we almost closed the company down because of the poor state of British agriculture. And there was it was in a bad way at that time in the 80s and, in the early 20s. And a vet said, Barry, you can't stop. You've got to take it to people. It'll work for people. And that particular vet had already used the technology to, instead of an antibiotic in a disease called watery mouth disease, for example, which is where lambs' saliva glands get out of control and the lamb drowns in their own saliva. And he was able to control that on farm, and he could see the propensities of what this could do for people. And it was him that said, look, Barry, you've got to keep going. So we just closed down for 10 years and pushed to get our first study through.
That's phenomenal. And you closed down the farm for 10 years to get the study through. So
No, I turned down the multigerm operation, which was the precursor of Symprove. In other words, the idea of animal feed. What we did is we reversed the technology. Instead of using the bacteria to preserve the grain, we squeezed the life out of barley, which gave us a very, very rich nutritional soup that allowed us to maximize the bacterial count and deliver in a liquid form on an extract of germinated barley, which of course is a prebiotic, and then laced with our bacteria. And our bacteria has the expertise of producing lactic acid for your microbiome.
Absolutely fascinating. And I want to dive into this a little bit more later in the show. But there seems to be a disconnect to what is a probiotic and what is just edible bacteria, because the market has so many different, I don't know what to call them, bacteria in a capsule, let's say, and they even measure them by CFUs or colony forming units. But I'm not sure that's always the case because they can't market something as a probiotic. Do you see this being the case? And Chris, maybe you want to comment first and then Barry.
Yes, that's a really good point. What I love about the story that Barry gave was the fact that he had this product that he knew that it worked. And it was actually kind of flipping it on its head and reversing it and saying, actually, how can we now prove that this product actually works and generate the data, which is really fascinating to hear. And as you said, Ben, there is a difference. We know that between edible bacteria and probiotics, the probiotics are different in that they contain live organisms, and they're usually specific strains of bacteria, and they're actually directly added to the population of healthy microbes in the gut. So that's where you have that difference between edible bacteria and probiotics, which is important for a lot of people to kind of appreciate. I think a lot of people might hear bacteria and think it's bad, but actually we have to appreciate the fact that there are good and there are bad bacteria, and it's about harnessing those good bacteria, making sure that they colonize the gut and that they support the microbiome, making it more diverse, rich, and that's thought to be a more healthier state for our microbiome to be in.
Chris, that makes perfect sense. I think it's really important to know that, the probiotics don't always, or bacteria don't always have a beneficial effect on the gut microbiome, and probiotics are specific strains that have a health benefit. I think it's important to add to what Chris said is that the stomach is an amazing organ, and it has the capacity to kill 99.9% of all bacteria that go through it. And the trick that Symprove has is that, we've already trained our bacteria to live in an acidic environment, and they can pass through the stomach. And the really important thing is that we can measure them at 100% at the colon. So it doesn't really matter how big a number you're selling. It's what the number can do that counts. And that's where we really get measurables to show that the lactic acid that we're producing in the colon actually stimulates your own microbiome to function at a different level. Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. And is it that they are, because probiotics can have different benefits in the sense that they can have a transient effect, almost that they change what's produced in the gut without changing the population of species in the gut, or they can actually populate the gut. What's happening with Symprove?
Well, that is a fascinating area. And of course, it's early days as we learn. And we've got a huge amount of work running with a company called ProDigest to be able to track all this stuff. But to give you one, for example, I was often told, you need to put a bifidobacteria in the product because it's got some data and it's a good product, a good bacteria to have. And on all the tests that we've shown, without exception, whether it's on somebody who's very ill indeed with this is all on fecal samples from Parkinson's, or someone who is completely well and no symptoms, without exception, the bifidobacteria goes up. Now, the important thing there is, A, we're not delivering a bifido, and B, we're making the bifidobacteria that belongs there function properly. So it will not be transient because that's its home. If you introduce a bifido that doesn't belong there, it's likely to be transient.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're almost empowering, I guess I'm going to use the word empowering the bacteria that's already there to kind of, I guess, function as it should, hopefully, and maybe colonize more? Is that what's happening? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, so the measurements are very clear, and it's across the board on a whole range of patient groups: Parkinson's, Down syndrome, ulcerative colitis, IBS, liver cirrhosis, C. diff, E. coli, and always in triplicate and always with controls. And without exception, all of the good commensal bacteria significantly rise, and all of the pathogenic bacteria significantly reduce. The interesting thing is that once you stimulate the good commensals with the lactic acid that they require to feed on, they then start producing more food for themselves, which is normally acetate and propionate, which is needed to further feed the bacterial flora. And then they start to produce butyrate, which of course they don't require, but their host does. And butyrate is known to be wound healing and anti-carcinogenic, so not a bad thing for your microbiome to be producing. It would have been producing it at a much lower level prior to taking Symprove, and you can see the significant increases in all of these feeds post-treatment.
Amazing. And yes, you're completely right about butyrate. It has a number of health benefits. And one of them is that it's the main substrate for the epithelial cells that make up the gut lining. So if there's any damage, it seems to help heal that almost. And it seems to be beneficial. Well, probiotics have been touted for all kinds of health benefits, as we know. It seems to benefit the whole system. Chris, I wonder if you could come in here. Do you have any opinion of why probiotics are so beneficial? What are they acting on?
Yeah, so probiotics have a huge, wide range of benefits for our body. They help in terms of digestion of food, as Barry's mentioned, making sure that you keep the bad bacteria numbers down, and also encouraging or empowering, as you said, Ben, the good bacteria to grow and support a more healthy and diverse microbiota. They also are important for helping to create certain vitamins and have a really key function in our immunity as well. And as you say, they actually enhance that barrier within our gut to make sure that sort of larger molecules and pathogens don't cross through the gut and into our bloodstream.
That makes perfect sense. With the kind of the healing, what can people, if they don't know that they have certain damage to the gut, what can people experience if these kinds of pathogens? One of them I remember is called lipopolysaccharide, which is like a shedding of bacteria. What can they experience if these get into the bloodstream?
So in terms of some symptoms that people have, especially when you come to look at gut health, symptoms I see often as a GP clinic, patients come to me and they sort of mention that they have abdominal pain, cramping, bloating, maybe diarrhea or constipation. These are quite typical symptoms that people have when they experience sort of poor gut health. And that's why things like that's why probiotics and food supplements can actually help to support the gut microbiota, improve that diversity, and actually help to relieve some of the symptoms that people have. Because throughout the last few years as a GP, what I've seen more and more is people kind of managing their own symptoms, but actually rather poorly. So it kind of quite heartbreaking to hear people's stories about how they've not managed to look after themselves, and they've been basically suffering in silence. And there's so much that we can do to help people with poor gut health. And one of those aspects, as we'll talk about today, are things like probiotics, and they have been shown to actually support and reduce some gut health symptoms that people have.
Quick pause. We're thrilled to say that our sponsor for this podcast today is Human People. Human People is a personalised health platform set up by functionally trained doctors and nutritionists right here in the UK, and they're on a mission to give you a healthier, longer and more productive life. When we start to feel a bit tired, get aches, pains, or brain fog, it can be a challenge to work out the root cause of that problem and how we can solve it. Well, Human People are offering a solution. They empower you to better understand your health issues and use AI technology to provide clear, actionable steps to help you meet your goals. Choose between blood, DNA, and gut tests to look for common nutritional deficiencies and important gene SNPs, and get your personalized recommendations reviewed by a doctor, and all for less than a price of your daily coffee. The quality of their supplements is excellent, and their recyclable packs means no more plastic bottles filling up your cupboard. Better for you, better for the planet. Head over to humanpeople.co/functionalhealth and use code functionalhealth, all one word, at checkout to get 10% off any of their tests. And if you purchase any of their bundles, you'll get 6 months of a high-quality omega-3 supplement absolutely free. Feel better, live healthier, and start your journey today at humanpeople.co/functionalhealth. Back to the show. It seems like probiotics are acting on the bacteria within the gut to stop things like IBS and diarrhea. And Barry's already outlined some of the bacteria and why they seem to be crowded out, if you will, by probiotics like Symprove. Are there any other benefits that people can see other than the health benefits related to, I guess, gastrointestinal health, like IBS and bloating and things of that nature?
Yeah, so some of the things that we're starting to look at now and research is point towards is the role of probiotics and food supplements in the treatment and management of things like mental health. So that's quite a new emerging area. Barry's also touched upon the role of probiotics, food supplements in the treatment of Parkinson's disease, and there is that link there that is really exciting. And we're looking at whether sort of treatment in terms of the microbiome, the microbiota, whether that can actually influence certain conditions, whether that's neurological or mental health, and also even our skin, so things like eczema as well. Really exciting studies looking at that as well at the moment. So it's still very early days and a lot of research is needed, but it is pointing towards whether we can manage some symptoms of conditions or even influence the actual condition itself by using the gut as a target.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, my personal experience of skin issues, I used to have acne when I was very young. And what I notice is if I experience kind of bloating or kind of IBS-like symptoms, which happen very, very occasionally, I do get inflammation in my skin, whether it's spots or a slight rash or maybe some reddening and blotching and things of that nature, which is quite fascinating because everyone says that whatever is happening in the gut kind of tends to show on the skin first, and that seems to be the case with eczema. I don't know whether that's been your experience or if you have any theories around that, Chris.
Yeah, so I think people do experience different symptoms based on their gut, and as you say, some people do have gut symptoms and also skin issues. Whether they're completely related or not, I think that's actually the source of a lot of the research going on at the moment, is what is that link between the gut and the skin? How can we influence it? So yeah, it is really exciting and interesting stuff that's coming out at the moment.
Yeah, completely agree. Such a fascinating area. And Barry, you just touched on Parkinson's. That's fascinating. Is it Symprove? Are you working on that project directly?
Yes, I've been working on the project for 5 years. I've been aware of the potential for 10. Essentially, this is with my layman's hat on, and my understanding is that between sort of 50 and 60% of Parkinson's patients suffer from constipation as symptom number one, sometimes for a couple of decades before it's diagnosed, because they go to a gastroenterologist and the neurological symptoms don't arise until further down the track. When the connect is made and they're diagnosed as Parkinson's, there's already been quite a lot of damage done. So our and the reason that we were invited to do the study was that a lot of Parkinson's patients had found their own way to our product and were telling their clinicians. And then the clinicians invited us to back engineer the work. So we did lab work initially to show how the technology would work on Parkinson's patients' microbiome. We have a rodent study that's completed and waiting publication. We have 2 studies running in vivo. So there's going to be a 30-patient pilot study at Sheffield and a 90-patient study coming out of the Maurice Worrell Centre, which is at King's, which is the largest walk-in clinic in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so all of that, that was all in one sentence, but that's 5 years of work. And the outcomes are due over the coming months. And hopefully the largest of them, the King's one, will probably be just into next year before publication. And what the bench work is showing, so we do a lot of work that we then obviously have to show works in reality, is the same thing, that you increase the good guys, you deplete the bad guys. And it was this point that you'd picked up on epithelial wall breakdown. So essentially, again, talking from a lay perspective, if you have constipation, you distend the gut, you will generate lesions and bleeds. Those lesions and bleeds allow neurochemical aggregates to pass through the vagus nerve and to accelerate the Parkinson's. So the work that we did, and we did a little bit with a chap called Vish Patel as well, who educated me on Kappa-2 cells, which is how you can measure the repair rate of cells. And the technology has shown that we can do reparation at twice the speed that it will repair if you don't apply the product.
Amazing. So if you just to break that down, Barry, because you mentioned the vagus nerve there, and just for everyone, that's the nerve that is part of the enteric nervous system. It links the gut to the brain. And you mentioned cathode-2 cells, and they basically you can monitor them and see how they are repairing. But what do you mean by which cells are they repairing, and where are they?
Okay, so we're mimicking epithelial wall cells, and obviously there's no blood supply or nervous supply, so it's still considered to be in vitro work, but it's a good indicator. You can scratch, wound those cells, and you can look at the reparation rate with and without Symprove on a sieved fecal sample. And what that shows is that the fecal sample with Symprove had a twice the reparation rate in 24 hours than without. And I believe, although time will tell, that's to do with the butyrate production. Because if butyrate is wound healing, which there's quite a lot of evidence to say that it is, then that's a key thing to do. So if you can do two things in the case of the Parkinson's patients, and I call myself a dot joiner, it's just trying to join all these dots. So if you have got constipation, you've distended the gut, and you cause lesions and bleeds, the first thing to do is unblock the plumbing. And we can do that easily, and done so for years with IBS patients. So the second thing is you've now got the gut flowing properly, and you're starting to do reparation internally because the microbiome is functioning properly. And if you therefore have butyrate being produced, there is a greater chance, in my view, to be able to do reparation on that wound. If you can close the wound, you slow down or you improve the integrity of the gut wall, and therefore slow down the neurochemical aggregates, which then potentially slow down the onset of Parkinson's. So the really exciting thing here is that, well, firstly, you're not curing Parkinson's. Let's be absolutely clear. You're managing the situation, but as it's always there are outliers, but as it's generally the last 10 years of life, if you can slow that down so that it becomes the last 5 years of life, then you'll halve the amount of people in the world with Parkinson's. That is a real goal that we're aiming for.
That is absolutely phenomenal. And then you've outlined a lot of theory there, but potential plausible mechanisms for this actually working, which I think is fantastic. And it just shows, that the microbiome has been linked to many neurodegenerative conditions, including not only Parkinson's, but Alzheimer's and also MS, even, which is absolutely fascinating. And it feels like we're only scratching the surface, really, of what this can do for systemic health and well-being, whole body health and well-being, I should say.
Well, the clinicians who've done this work, particularly the pilot study, are already looking at least half a dozen areas where they would expect to see a similar outcome. Amongst those are the ones you've listed.
Yeah. So are they using Symprove as well? Sorry.
Yeah. So they're looking for pilots in motor neuron disease, in MS, in epilepsy. We've been offered studies left, right, and centre to try and replicate it within those particular patient groups.
This is very cool, isn't it? I'm quite excited already.
It is exciting. It's not really believable sometimes.
Yeah, it's just very humble beginnings, and you can see what you have achieved and are achieving. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty phenomenal.
Ben, just to touch upon Barry's point there, even just yesterday in my clinic, I had a patient who came to see me with Parkinson's disease, and her main concern was actually her bowels, her constipation, and not being able to kind of having so much discomfort. She wasn't able to go outside and do the usual stuff, like go shopping, go to the cafe with her daughter. So it does have a huge impact, just the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So if we are able to manage those symptoms with probiotics or food supplements, then it does actually have a huge impact on people's lives day to day. So it's really important.
This is probably a question partly like you're bound by the limitations of the NHS, Chris, so I'm very hyper aware of this, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. Do you advocate probiotics in a clinical setting, or would you? And what ways can you kind of promote gut health when you're in a GP clinic?
Yes, that's a really good question. I only work in the NHS, so my population is very different. I work in quite a deprived area, so gut health is one of those topics that I do like to speak about with patients, because we have a lot of IBS, a lot of mental health, and they're also quite linked. So talking about gut health with patients, probiotics are an option for some people. It just really does depend on budget and what people have available. But there's lots of other ways to kind of support a good gut microbiome. Make sure you're eating the right things, high fiber diet, lots of different plants, vegetables. I always talk to patients about ensuring that they have at least 30 different types of vegetable in their diet per week. Mm-hmm. So choosing different stuff, maybe shopping around, picking up fruits or vegetables in the supermarket that they don't usually have, and incorporating that into the diet. Also avoiding things that sometimes may have a negative impact on the gut microbiome. This includes things like alcohol, possibly even sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners may have a negative impact on the gut microbiome and the diversity, so avoiding those kind of things. And also relaxation techniques, regular exercise as well. There's one of my colleagues as well doing a lot of research in terms of exercise and the impact it has on the microbiome. And that's showing that actually just a small amount of exercise every day can also increase the number of good bacteria within the gut as well. So making sure that we're doing lots of different lifestyle stuff, the probiotics, and eating foods that are rich in live bacteria, so the natural yogurts, the kefir, sauerkraut, those kind of foods also help to increase the population of good gut bacteria. So I try and address it from different angles and meet people where they're at, because I completely understand that sometimes probiotics and some of the products out there aren't accessible, aren't affordable for people. But we do talk about different plans, and I know at Symprove are doing discounts as well for people to help them as well. So there's lots of different options for people to improve their gut health. So it shouldn't just be put off by cost necessarily, because there's lots of things that people can do.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And the thing is, these things can work not only by themselves, but synergistically as well, right? You've just outlined high fiber diets, the 30 different variations of plant foods that you can use, as well as probiotics. And those things can complement each other quite beautifully, if you will. Even if you use one alone, they can have a benefit, but they almost work synergistically. So you've mentioned aspects of lifestyle medicine, which I absolutely love. We all know stress affects the gut, so managing that's really important. And then exercise can benefit the microbiome as well as nutrition. And then sleep seems to just be the underpinning thing for everything. If you sleep badly, it affects how you digest your food and how you crave certain foods, some of those negative foods that you're talking about, those sugars, the alcohol, things of that nature. But I always think it's a balance, right? You know, someone mentioned to me the other day that it was bad that I was having a Diet Coke. I have my vices, right? And I have the occasional Diet Coke, but I feel like the rest of my lifestyle is very conducive to health and hopefully the health of my microbiome. So I feel there is a balance there as well to be struck. You know, you have to live your life as well as trying to live a healthy lifestyle.
Completely agree with that. And it's about doing the little things every day to help support your gut microbiome and your overall health. And they all add up. So just doing one little thing every day. And if you have a Diet Coke every now and again, it's not, you need to live and you need to enjoy your life. So definitely have that Diet Coke. It's going to add a lot to your life.
Yes, in different ways. Same with red wine. I feel the same with that too.
Go, Barry.
I was just going to pick up on the point that you made about sleep, because it's interesting that on the IBS study there was there's a whole range of questions, but sleep improvement was one of the big outcomes, and the scientists were interested in doing something on insomnia, and I think this is where sort of more common sense thinking sometimes come in, because I sort of gently pointed out the biggest impact we'd had was on pain. And if you haven't got pain, you will sleep. Now, I know that just from having a bad shoulder. You can't sleep properly if you're in pain. And what was happening was, if you can take the pain away, people slept better. It's all a knock-on effect. And I agree that there's so many other things you should be addressing. We had it drummed into us from Professor that you've got a good probiotic that has outcomes, but you've got to look at diet, you've got to look at fitness, you've got to look at psychological support. All four pillars, address all of them, you'll get massive results.
Absolutely. And what professor was that, Barry? I think you just cut off for a second there.
Professor Ingvar Bjarnason is probably the country's leading gastroenterologist, actually.
Amazing. I'll link to him in the show notes for listeners. And it was so interesting you said that the IBS study led to better sleep, because I'm aware of like over fermentation, like hyper fermentation within the gut, and that leads to pain. I mean, everyone's heard of people who suffer from IBS and they maybe go on low FODMAPs because they cannot tolerate these fibers that maybe someone with a healthy microbiome might be able to. So it's interesting to understand that, well, this is a mechanism, but it seems plausible to me from what we were speaking about, that shift in the gut microbiome integrity and the population of species within the microbiome can lead to less fermentation where it shouldn't be happening, and therefore better sleep because they're not in pain. It could be happening in another mechanism as well, but that is one which I would assume would be how it's effective.
Yeah, I mean, my own view is, I mean, there's lots of people looking to test our technology in a whole host of different patient groups. But to put it simply, we do exactly the same thing for everybody, however ill or well you are. And if you do that and get your own microbiome to function at a better level, there will be improvements.
That makes perfect sense and leads us very nicely onto a question I had in my back pocket for you, which, Barry, you might have a level of bias for. So I'll ask Chris to go first, maybe. And the question is, can probiotics benefit everyone?
Oh, really good question. And as you say, it kind of divides people. So that you have one camp that say actually probiotics are beneficial and it doesn't matter regardless of what you eat, probiotics still have a role in terms of supporting a good gut microbiome. Whereas some people will argue on the flip side that actually if you're having a diverse diet, then additional supplementation is not required. So I think the jury's very much out there, Ben. And I know that's a very on the fence answer.
That's absolutely fine, no problem at all. Very much a doctor's hat on there, Chris. I completely understand. What's your view, Barry?
Well, the way I tell this story is that I thought it would be absolutely impossible to prove that you can make a well person weller. And weller is my own word. It's not in the dictionary. So what we did is we looked for people who were very unwell because there are measurables there. And what was fascinating was when we did eventually get round to throwing samples at ProDigest to review people that were asymptomatic, no problems, no disease whatsoever, and reporting themselves well, that within that group, we did exactly the same to the microbiome as we did in every other group. And from that day onwards, there were two professors at School of Pharmacy who were involved in that, one from Belgium, a whole stack of scientists, all took Symprove from that day because it showed quite clearly that what you could do is enhance yourself to the point that you are likely to be able to maintain a higher level of health. But I would also add that 90% of who we serve are very unwell indeed.
Mm-hmm. So is it the fact that maybe, I mean, you say a well person weller, this is really interesting. What markers are you looking at necessarily to assume that, I mean, or have you found? Well,
there was a long questionnaire, basically a tick box, that said that they were not suffering from any diagnosed illness and that they felt and that they were well when they supplied the fecal samples. And with a well fecal sample, exactly the same thing happened as it did to all of those that we'd already tested many times before who were unwell with various other diseases. It's just the same picture.
Right, okay, so you get improvements in healing and things of that nature, which maybe you wouldn't have otherwise.
No, I'm talking, we didn't do that on healing, but what we did do was measure of the commensal bacteria increasing, measure of pathogenic and opportunistic bacteria decreasing, short-chain fatty acid production up significantly. And on somebody who has no disease problems, it does the same there as well.
Yeah, I mean, this almost comes to, I mean, I love the word weller, so I'm not taking that away from you, Barry, but building resilience is something that I've spoken about in the past, right? So making you resilient to these kinds of illnesses that people are prone to. And when you were talking about Parkinson's, this kind of really resonates with me, the idea that you can prevent things from happening by building resilience in the human body. And I think through what Chris touched upon as well with lifestyle medicine and you know, focusing on sleep, stress, what we eat, etc., that is all part of that, as well as focusing on probiotics for the gut as well. I think it's all part of the same picture.
Yeah, and there's a whole host of inflammatory diseases that are accelerating like no tomorrow. And one of the other key factors that's come out of every single data dump that we've had is that we improve the inflammatory markers. So that's really important as well. Just so much comes from your microbiome functioning properly. We're scratching the surface even now.
Brilliant. And something I want to ask you both, but maybe we'll start with Chris, is that you both said before we went online that you took a shot of Symprove, before we started. I was interested in understanding what your benefits have been, or if you've experienced any.
Yeah, so for my sort of the benefits that I'm having is that I find I'm more regular in terms of going to the toilet, and also the fact that I think it actually helps me kind of during the day as well. Helps with sleep, so it helps with regulation for me. I just feel actually less bloated on a day-to-day basis. So those were kind of the main benefits for me that I've kind of enjoyed. As Barry says, you know, I don't really suffer from any medical problems, but it does help build that resilience. And I love the word weller, so I think that's also one of the benefits for me.
I love that too. The bloating side, and these are such common problems, you know, that people suffer from, kind of constipation for one, but also just not going to the toilet that frequently. I mean, it's so ubiquitous, but bloating is something that I think everyone experiences every once in a while. So having less of that, I completely think that's an excellent benefit.
Especially now when it's summer and everyone's kind of on the beach and you want to look your best. So.
You look amazing, Chris.
And for everyone's benefit, Chris is just back from Bali, so his pictures will be on his Instagram. No. And Barry, what's your experience been?
Well, mine aren't as direct. If I'm absolutely honest, I've always had the bacterial formulation or the developing formulation around me. I would regularly test product, would do sampling. If somebody said that they were unhappy, I'd drink the bottle. I never took Symprove regularly. And I'm a lucky person. I have generally very good health. Mm-hmm. But I've taken it every day without exception. I even take it with me after I saw the data on Well People, as did half the medical team, because it was just staring you in the face where I'd been struggling so hard to prove a measurable within symptomatic patients. We'd all seen in front of our eyes that actually it's doing your own microbiome a huge benefit, and therefore, why wouldn't you take it? So I take it now because I've seen the data.
Amazing. And in terms of what, and this is a question for the two of you, but Barry, you can maybe start. What is the most exciting thing that you're currently working on, or what research are you most excited about with regards to probiotics and Symprove in health?
Shall I go, Chris?
Yeah, I think Barry's best. Yeah.
Okay, so off the back of the constipation work and the Parkinson's work, we ran the samples of 6 Down syndromes children through the ProDigest system. It yet again showed the same impact, slightly different for each patient, but across the board a significant improvement. And we are now, or rather Professor Simon Gaisford is now running a real-world evidence study to help children that have constipation with Down syndrome. And to top that, over a bottle of wine, we also are looking, it was Simon's idea, to try and generate a charity called, what we've already registered, called Promotive, so that we can help those that are economically challenged to get the product by getting it through a charity. So we're looking to build that over this year as well.
That's absolutely phenomenal. And once you build it, I will definitely link it in the show notes so people can have access to it. That's incredible. Chris?
So Ben, just for clarification, I'm not involved with the actual research in Symprove. I'd love to be, but at the moment I'm helping more with sort of health comms and sort of social media. So
no problem at all. But what excites you about probiotics in general then? Let's go general question.
So what excites me most is actually the benefit of probiotics in terms of symptoms such as IBS. Because for me as a GP, I see lots of patients who come in with very vague abdominal symptoms, and after all the tests come back and they're completely normal, you're left with someone who's not sure how to manage their condition. Mm-hmm. And actually one of those exciting avenues can be probiotics as well as other modalities. So if we're able to look at improving people's quality of life, I actually feel that probiotics do have a really important role in terms of reduction of these kind of gut symptoms that people quite often find quite debilitating.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I have had friends with idiopathic IBS, and we don't know what the cause is. And they've tried lots of different things and things haven't worked. So I think probiotics are a really nice answer to that. And if we can get something which is repeatedly beneficial and reliable to have a proven benefit, that would be amazing. And I always look at the not cost to benefit ratio, but risk to benefit ratio of these kinds of things. And sometimes the science isn't all there. But like Barry said before, sometimes the preliminary science is staring you in the face of these things being beneficial, and you try them yourself and you get these benefits. So I think if someone has it available to them, trying something like that cannot do that much harm. Obviously, you always work with your doctor and your physician. I am not a doctor, so I'm going to put my hands up there. But I feel that's a good way forward.
I think it's really important to point out that, in the olden days, they were pretty smart, and Hippocrates' most important point was to do no harm. Mm-hmm. And if, as a food supplement, we already tick half of the clinician's box because it can't do any harm. And if you can then have measurable benefits, and that's really like a win-win. So for me, the biggest thing that has to happen is the education for clinicians to understand how to use this type of technology, mm-hmm. and to make it available to those that are sort of in the most vulnerable position.
Absolutely. I am just going to touch upon one thing there because I'm going to catch myself before I fall. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, can be diagnosed as IBS, but actually probiotics might worsen that condition, which is the only one I know of. But it's just for note for the listeners. I'm not sure about Symprove. I've not seen the research if there is some on SIBO, but that is just something to consider because you can get over fermentation in the smaller gut, and that can lead to pain. So that is something to note if you do experience that. But it's very, very rare, but it's just something to consider as well. Moving on, both of you have been absolutely amazing, and I wanted to say something. I have no relation to Symprove, just before people think this is a sponsored podcast or anything like that. But when Chris mentioned that he knew Barry, I was so excited to have you on because I looked up the research, and it's absolutely fascinating. And it seems like you have so many people touting the benefits of your product that I was really excited to have this conversation with you, and you have not disappointed. We've gone all over the place and chatting about the research, your journey, and things of that nature. And what I'll do for people that are maybe a little bit more scientifically minded or want to have further information, I'll link to some studies in the show notes that Barry's mentioned and currently working on, as well as his website, and Chris in terms of all the projects that he is working on as well. But before you both go, I've got one question, and that is, what is the most impactful health change you have made in your life, and why? Barry, would you like to go first?
Sure. Mine's very simple. I went from a working man to desk-bound meeting man trying to push the project forward on Symprove, and I managed to, inadvertently, creeping up on me, put on 2 stone, and I hit over 17 stone at one stage. And so the most impactful thing that I did was to start to exercise on a regular basis and to lose a bit of weight, and that has been really impactful for me, and generally I feel so much better for it. And I think the trouble is with the sort of general inertia that is within most of the jobs these days, sort of sitting in front of a desk and a computer and not taking time for yourself to get your heart rate up on a regular basis. I know Chris is a avid keep fitter as well, but I try to exercise at least 4 times a week, and that's the most impactful thing I've done recently.
Love that. Chris?
Yeah, so apart from, as Barry mentioned, avid keep fitter, I think for me the most impactful thing I've kind of done is over the last years really set a tight bedtime routine. So by sort of 10 o'clock, 10:30, I'm always in bed, regardless of the number of emails that work piling up, messages that I need to reply to. I'm always like, okay, at 8 o'clock I start my wind down routine, and by 10 I'm in bed, because actually when I wake up the next day, I'm refreshed and not tired. I'm more productive. I make the right food choices. I'm more likely to go to the gym and exercise well and have more energy. So that's, for me, has been the most important thing, because having seen lots of patients, sleep is one of those really underrated pillars. But as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, it actually affects pretty much all aspects of our lives. So really making sure that I have a good bedtime routine, I'm in bed at a sensible time, is important, because I've worked as a junior doctor in the NHS for 10 years. My pattern has been all over the place: nights, weekends, long days. So now that, since I've qualified, no longer junior doctor, it has been really important to set and redefine my bedtime routine so that I have more energy and more productive the following day.
I completely resonate with both those changes. Phenomenal. I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure to have you both on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Thanks for your time. It was lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you for listening to the Functional Health Podcast. You can find links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. If you have a second, please consider leaving a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does make a huge difference and helps get this valuable information out and reach more people. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date and know whenever I release a new episode. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, and all questions are welcome. As always, thanks to Josh Aurelia for all the editing, and thank you all for your support.